I'm going to record this meeting so that we have that and turn on our transcript in case anybody needs that. And there we go. All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our first ever grad school preparation program. I'm super excited to be sharing this with all of you today. Hopefully we answer all of your questions about anything you might be wondering about the grad school application process, identifying schools to apply to, GRE, letters of recommendation. We're going to talk about it all. So hopefully you're able to learn a lot tonight. So the things that we're going to cover, first we're going to do some introductions of our panelists and the people we have presenting tonight. Then we're going to talk about, is grad school right for me? So deciding if applying and going to grad school is something that makes sense for you and your future career aspirations. Then we're going to talk about actually preparing your application. So the actual steps of submitting that application, gathering all of the relevant materials that you need. We'll talk about some OSU specific resources available to help you out. And then we're going to finish off tonight with a Q&A session. So anything we haven't touched on or that we have that you're still curious about, there'll be plenty of time for you to ask us anything you might have. So to kick us off, the three of us are going to go ahead and introduce ourselves. So my name is Katie Morton. I am the program coordinator for supplemental instruction with ODI's Scholarship and Supplemental Academic Services Unit. And I'm going to hand it off to Kira to introduce herself.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Kira Carson. I am a coordinator with the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Specifically, I work with the Young Scholars Program, where I work with third year and beyond students and helping them prepare for their transition after OSU, one of which is preparing for graduate school. So welcome.
All right, thanks, Kira. And now, Omar, if you could introduce yourself.
Hey guys, my name is Omar Saker. I'm the program coordinator for the Moral Scholarship Program. I work specifically with the third and fourth years to plan events and do success coaching, amongst many other things.
All right, thanks, Omar. And also here today with us, we have Zaid Abakar, our Assistant Director of Scholarship and Supplemental Academic Services. And Zaid is going to be monitoring our chat tonight and handling any questions that you all may have as the presentation goes along. So we will pause for any questions that might come up as we're transitioning between sections of the presentation tonight, but there will also be plenty of time to ask questions at the end. So feel free to utilize that chat as we go. And tonight, to kick us off, before we get started, if you can share in the chat what you're aiming to go to graduate school for. So whether it's medical or law school, whether you're hoping to get, PhD in biology, whatever it might be, to give us a little bit of some context for who we have in the room talking to today. So while you all are sharing that, I'm going to pass it off to Omar, and he is going to start us off with some things to consider when you're thinking about going to graduate school.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that. So yeah, I have really the privilege to talk to you guys today about graduate school, and I'm joined by a team of panelists who also know a lot about the process. One thing I do want to say is that the graduate school process is actually very, very rigorous in terms of applications and in terms of applying, but it's also very, very specific. So Zaid and I were having a conversation the other day about, it's not applying grad school is not something where you can, throw out a shotgun approach of 30 different applications and hope one sticks. Every single program is looking for something specific. Every single program is looking for something different. So one of the biggest things that you have to be, Katie, if you can get the next slide for me, one of the biggest things that you have to have in this process is being intentional. You got to know exactly what you're doing. A graduate school can't just be something that you do because it's the most logical next step. There's far more that goes into it than that. It's something that you have to really ask yourself what motivation you have for applying to grad school and why you want to take that on. So if you're in a specific career that requires grad school, an example of that is being a dentist or being a lawyer or being a doctor. Those are all professional schools, and they require a graduate program for you to participate in that career. And so that would, yes, be a logical next step if you are hoping to leave an impact through one of those careers. But I think one of the biggest mistakes that students make is when you're young and you're in undergrad, you look around at all the possibilities that you have. And at that point, you're undifferentiated, meaning you haven't really decided yet. And the whole world is your oyster, and you have so many options before you. But once you go down the grad school path, once you commit to that, you're pretty much locked in for a plethora of reasons. There's so many different reasons that you kind of get locked in down to a path. First off, a graduate program is rigorous. It's going to require your full focus. So it requires dedication of time, concentration, focused effort. It also requires, in most cases, a financial commitment as well. Now, that being said, it's really important, therefore, to be able to sit down and really ask all the right questions and be a detective and essentially make sure that you interrogate people who have gone down that career. Many people don't know, for instance, that medical school, the burnout rate is 51%. So 1 out of every 2 physicians feels burnt out in medicine. That has to do with the problems of healthcare, obviously. It's a complex field with many moving parts. But it's something that you really want to know and be cognizant of what that looks like in terms of the lifestyle, what that works in terms of the day to day. Students often assume, for instance, that medical school, you get to be this magnanimous physician helping a lot of people. But in reality, sometimes nurses end up having a more intimate connection with patients than doctors do. Physical therapists or physician's assistants can also have that same level without that added responsibility and liability as well, right? So I think the biggest, tip at this point is to really kind of broaden your options. I think when you're younger, you look around again, like I said, and you see what's the highest thing that I can aim for, and it's really comes down to it really is a question of what's the most prestigious thing I can aim for, and that can't be your goal. Surely that's part of it. You do definitely want to consider that when you're looking at grad programs, which ones have the clout and which ones don't, and that matters in certain fields and it doesn't matter in others. For instance, University of Toledo College of Medicine is, I think, relatively ranked, I think maybe 120, 130 in terms of med schools, for much further down. But you can then go into a specialty in residency that is ranked super high. Therefore, you get that notoriety from your residency program and then can go on to be one of the most successful physicians in your industry. Law school, however, is different. In the legal profession, so in the medical profession, you could get a residency from a place that not very many people know and still match as a neurosurgeon if your grades are good and your research is impressive and so on, so forth, and still get a really, really high earning potential if that's what you're looking for, or really prestigious institutions that you're getting to teach at and so on and so forth, right? So medicine is a little bit more open in the sense that the MD is really what matters and not necessarily the school. All that matters is you've received the training to become a stellar physician. For the most part, there will always be biases, DO versus MD versus which school you went to. There will always be biases, but on the whole, in medicine, you typically don't see that. Law school, however, would be an example of the opposite. The big companies, a big law is what it's called. Some of the biggest companies in New York and some of the bigger cities, they're only looking to hire people from maybe Harvard or maybe Yale or maybe Columbia or what have you, to essentially give their firm that credibility and that clout, essentially. So in the law field, it's a little bit different than it would be in the medical field, and that's because medicine is very much everybody is going to be in need of a physician. Everybody needs a surgery. Everybody needs so on and so forth. And so for that field, it's whoever really has the training is allowed to do it. Now, every field is different, and I'm only speaking to medicine and law as examples, but that's something that you really want to consider. So what is the prestige of the school, and does it really even matter at that point? Another thing that you want to consider is kind of the differences between a master's and a PhD. So maybe you like higher education, maybe you like learning. Katie, if you can hit the next slide for me. So yeah, master's versus PhD. I think it's on the following slide, but we'll go ahead and address it here. Essentially, most master's programs require you to pay for the program, and then most PhDs actually have funding opportunities for them. So usually as a PhD, you have what you'll have is a GA position. You'll teach to earn your tuition, or even you'll have funding opportunities from the school, depending on the PhD. If you're going into a STEM field PhD that requires, that is needed for a lot of these corporate professions, or these technical professions where they require, an engineer that knows a specific branch of knowledge to apply to cars or manufacturing or what have you. You'll find that there's a lot of funding in places like this. But if your PhD is esoteric, it's a little bit abstract, maybe in art or philosophy or what have you, you're going to find that the funding is limited. And so it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to gain a funding for PhD. But on the whole, PhDs are typically covered. Master's programs are typically not covered, but there are exceptions in masters where you can find funding for that. And so those are some things you want to consider. I don't think students talk about this enough. And I think anybody who's older will kind of see that they went through a transition. In my 20s, I was really focused on impact. I was really focused on legacy. And I think that's always going to be there. But you also then start to recognize that, okay, you're going to be a part of a family. You're going to start having people depend on you and responsibility. And so in order to be present for them, you're going to start to think about lifestyle. You're going to think about a lot of the other intangibles. Lifestyle is important, and also earning potential is important to be able to provide your family with the highest possible lifestyle. So that's something that you don't necessarily think about when you're in your early 20s and thinking about PhDs or masters, but earning potential is certainly something that you want to start to think about now. If you are going into a PhD, for instance, that's many years that you are not necessarily getting, you're basically getting enough to cover living expenses and to cover, just cost of living and living a decent enough lifestyle. But those years in that PhD, you're not working in the workforce, and therefore you may be missing out on a $120,000 position a year or an $80,000 position a year. And if you're in a PhD for 5 or 6 years, that's 5 times 100. Maybe you lost out on $500,000. And the hopes is that you gain that back by having a higher salary for many, many years later. So that's something that you really want to calculate and consider. By no means should that be your biggest priority. Definitely, you have to be passionate about what you do. Otherwise, you simply won't get through these programs. They're that rigorous. You have to find a why. You have to find a meaning to why you're doing what you're doing. And that actually takes precedence over anything else. But you want to be very comprehensive in your approach to considering grad school. What does it look like financially? And being very realistic. Many people go into debt and find that maybe positions after their PhD are not as lucrative because the industry itself has changed. So you have to start wondering, you have to start questioning, okay, what's the longevity of this industry? Will this type of PhD always be in demand? That's not an attractive thing to think about. It's not, the most exciting thing to think about it in that way. It's more, exciting to talk about what legacy and impact you'll have going into grad school and leaving behind for the people around you. But certainly, again, you want to consider that. So I do want to touch upon also medical school and law school. So dental school would fall under medical school. PA school would also fall under medical school. OT school would also fall under medical school, that kind of umbrella. Law school is a little bit different because for law school, if you do well enough on your LSAT, and if you score really, really strongly on your LSAT, you have the opportunity essentially to get a full scholarship. What they call it is tuition remission. So it's not really a scholarship like the MSP would be. It would be more like, okay, you have tuition that's $150,000 over the course of 3 years of law school. We're going to go ahead and remit all that so you don't have to pay any tuition at all. So you can essentially get an entirely covered full ride. That means you have to do incredibly well on your LSAT. We're talking about 95th percentile and above, so meaning only 5% of students have achieved that score, and certainly it's doable. I don't discount people on the fact of intelligence, but about persistence. People spend a year taking that test many times until they finally fall into that high percentile and then get the scholarship that they want. They figure, well, okay, 1 year of studying will mean that I am not paying I'm not going into $150,000 of debt, which also means that I'll come out of it debt free, and whatever I earn thereafter will go straight into my pocket. And so those are certainly things to consider. Another thing in terms of medical school unfortunately does not offer that type of lucrative scholarship. So even if you do incredibly well on your MCAT, your DAT, your GRE, what have you, a lot of these professional schools for the medical field, unfortunately, don't offer full rides. Now, I don't know all of the hundreds of programs out there. I'm sure there's certainly exceptions. There are some medical schools. There's Rosemont medical school, I think in Chicago, that had a really unique setup where it paid all of its students tuition and they didn't have to pay anything for medical school. And in fact, fun fact for you Harry Potter fans, they had 4 different houses in the medical school: one Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. But so there are some very rare but unique models out there that you want to consider, but by and large, medical schools are not necessarily really covered under the expenses of scholarships and what have you. Yes, there is opportunities for scholarships. You can see many students getting 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 in scholarship. But if the average debt of a medical student is $250K upon graduation, that's kind of a drop in the bucket. But again, earning potential over the long term, if all things go well in medical school and you go down that track quickly, it's very, very lucrative. Something to consider is, if you're going to take a gap year for medical school, recognize that you're actually shortening your earning potential by $300,000, let's say, because your salary once you graduate is going to be $300,000. So if you're taking an extra year to study for your MCAT or to do research, recognize that that's 1 year, one less year in the long term. Again, those things don't matter now when you're young as much, but when you're older, looking back, you want to kind of have that long-term view. So there's just some things to think about. PhDs, like I mentioned earlier, have TA and GA opportunities, teaching assistant and graduate assistant opportunities where you basically teach to cover the cost of your PhD. I've definitely seen, students who have had troubles with teaching positions and what have you, and essentially put their funding at risk. So obviously, you have to dedicate those positions as full-time or as jobs in their own respects, and give them their due. And take those seriously, because your funding is contingent upon success as a GA and TA. Another thing to consider, we have a hand raised by Kira. Do I answer that now or do I answer that later?
I was just going to add that one other thing that people may want to consider. One of the things that I tell scholars that I work with is that there are both master's and doctoral programs that only admit students that they will fund, right? So at OSU, for example, our in the education in human ecology, the higher education and student affairs master's program is a fully funded program. So when you enter, both of your years are funded. So one of the things that you may want to consider is only looking at programs that fund, right? That is another option.
Yeah, thank you, Kira, for that point. So you really have to, again, I can't stress this enough. You really have to look at these graduate programs in a very tailored way. You have to recognize exactly what they're looking for, exactly what they offer, and play your strengths to that program, and make sure that you're a good fit. The next point in terms of considering grad school, I'll stay on this slide and then we'll backtrack. I apologize for going out of order, but faculty fit. I'll give you a little story about this. One of my actually buddies, he got into an aerospace PhD program in Austin, Texas. He was really, really, really adamant about working with the professor there under him as a PhD. And so he goes there for that school specifically for him because he had a great fit for him. What happened was once he got there, and he was working a couple months and started his PhD, his professor, he's working under, his research advisor for his PhD, ended up getting a position at Stanford. And so the student was very, very, very lucky in the fact that his professor was like, okay, I'm taking you with me. And so he followed his professor to Stanford, and continued there with the aerospace PhD. Now, most people are not that lucky. A lot of the times, what you'll see is, people going into a PhD, starting with a certain professor, recognizing the fit is just not right with their advisor a year or two into it. And there becomes some significant problems where the student has to go to a different research advisor and start the whole PhD process. Excuse me, start the whole PhD process all over again. That's the last thing that you want. Another 2 years in a PhD, restarted, you lost 2 years with the wrong advisor. That's why you have to make sure that the research interests line up with what exactly that you want to do, and the faculty fits as well. Another thing that you want to consider, a lot of you guys as MSP are very, very diverse candidates. If, for instance, you go to a school that has different political leanings than yourselves, with a different composition of professors from maybe a monolithic background that you don't resonate with, it actually makes it very hard for you necessarily to compete there, because a lot of the PhD professors might resonate better with other students from different backgrounds, and you might find yourself as a disadvantage. That's not something really overtly spoken about, but if the school does not really value diversity and they just have a diversity office to say that they're completing the diversity requirement, those are some red flags. I remember, I'm not going to mention the school name, but I remember being in an interview with a school, and we asked them, what do you guys think? We were doing an interview, and it was like maybe 8 or 9 students with the diversity leader or what have you for the grad program. And we asked him, I asked him the question, I was like, what do you think is the strength of your program? And then he said, diversity. I think we're doing a good job building our diversity program. And then I asked him right after that, what do you think is a weakness of the program? And he mentioned, yeah, we're not diverse enough in our faculty. We're not diverse enough in what have you. So immediately that should have been essentially a red flag. It's like, okay, well, what are you guys really doing with diversity? Are you the type of school that is like promoting it so you can necessarily, talk students into getting it? Or are you a student that has a long, or a program that has a long-standing tradition of diversity and can recognize the struggles of different demographics and different populations? Zaid, I'll let you speak.
Yeah. So I'm raising hand here simply because I'm exercising my role as the moderator, and I want to make sure that we get to our other presenters and our questions at the end.
Sorry, I'm very long.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I want to make sure that, because a lot of our students have classes and things going on, so the Q&A is going to be really rich for sure.
Yeah, can you get, how much time do I have? Are we already done and I just need to move on? What's the verdict?
Omar, if you can quickly maybe share some things from this slide, how to begin looking for a program, and then I'll move into talking about the application stage.
Okay, I'll just finish this slide. I'll take 1 minute and then we can move on. How do you start looking for a program? Obviously, you have to prioritize the list of things that's important to you, whether that's tuition, the location, the city that you want to be, what if you want to experience a bigger city or not, the specialty or the career that you want to go into. Do they have, if you're going into medicine, do they have a strong program for urology if you want to become a urologist or what have you? Talk to professors, TAs, mentors, friends. Google US News and World Reports. LinkedIn will be a great resource. I will also kind of warn you of talking to students in terms of like on the tours of the school. Those students are speaking on behalf of the school and they are selected by the school to promote them in a very positive light. So take what they say with a grain of salt if you do a tour or if you visit students on campus or in that program. Nobody in their right, nobody who's really representing the school is really going to say a lot of the struggles of that school. So that's just something to keep in mind. Definitely do your diligence. There's so many different things that you want to look for. And US News and World Report will tell you what the school is ranked highly in. I'm not going to take any more time from our panelists here. I'm sure they have so many more ideas to share with you about this as well. And then I'll be here for the Q&A afterwards. Thank you guys for your time.
All right, thanks, Omar. So next up, I'm going to be talking about the preparing your application stage. So you've considered the factors, you figured out that grad school is something that makes sense for you in your career path, you're ready to start going. So let's talk about what are grad schools looking for when they're evaluating their applications. So the first thing, a caveat I do want to make at the beginning, all of these factors grad schools are going to consider as a holistic package when they're reviewing your application. Program to program, school to school, they're going to be weighing these things a little bit differently. For example, a lot of schools now have gone test optional in terms of their GRE requirement and other standardized test requirements, but some schools still require them. And in that case, the test scores are more important. So just, a disclaimer at the beginning of all of this, make sure that when you're deciding to start filling out your applications, you do some research into the program website and see what you can find out about what is most important to that school so that you can build the most successful application package for each program. So the first thing schools are looking at is your academic preparation. So that's, for a lot of programs, your GPA is really important, but it can also include things like taking specific courses, or again, those test scores might come into that. So schools, grad school is school after all, right? And so your undergraduate education does matter quite a bit when you're looking into these graduate programs. So your academic preparation is definitely important. Again, maybe you don't have a super strong GPA, but you can make up for it in some of these other areas. That's why it's important to remember that this is a holistic package. So don't worry if maybe you feel like you're a little bit behind in one area. There are always things you can use to kind of bolster your application in some of these other areas. Another thing that schools are looking for are what are your career goals? So when a grad school decides to accept you into their program, no matter what kind of program it is, they're making an investment in you. They're, giving their resources and their time and their faculty, their research spots, all of these things to help make you a better professional on the other side. And they want to make sure that your interests and what you want to do ultimately align with what they can provide you. And they also want students that they know are dedicated and are serious about studying whatever it is they're going to school for. So having strong career goals identified is going to go a long way. And this will come out in maybe any essay questions you're asked to do for the application, your personal statement, any interviews you might be doing. You can guarantee for the most part that you're going to be asked about what are your career goals and how is this program going to help you meet it. Another thing that a lot of grad schools, especially in the humanities and those types of areas, are really looking for are your writing skills. So this will come if that school requires test scores, or if you choose to send test scores to that school, they'll evaluate kind of your writing score as a component of that, but also those personal statements and essays. So they're not just looking for content there. A lot of schools are also looking for how strong you are as a writer. So you want to make sure that you are, either having a friend or family member review your essays or taking it to a writing center or something like that to make sure that your writing looks up to par. Can everyone make sure we're muted? I think I'm hearing a little bit of echoing and I want to make sure everyone's able to hear us. Okay, thank you. So the next factor that schools are going to look for is fit within the department. And what I mean by fit is not just necessarily do they like you and can they see you as a part of their program? That's definitely part of it, but it also is making sure that your interests and your goals and your background kind of aligns with what they are looking for. So graduate admission programs, they have an idea of what they want their incoming class to look like. And yes, diversity is important here in terms of race, ethnicity, all of that, but also diversity in terms of undergraduate experience, background, different life experiences, and different research interests that you'll be bringing. So these admission counselors, when they're evaluating you, are looking to make sure you as the whole package, do you fit with what the department's needs are right now? And that can be a little tricky. That's probably the factor that you have the least control over. You can't really control what the department is looking for, but you can definitely do some research into the program to make yourself look like the most attractive candidate possible, to make sure that you're really hitting at in your application what are the most important things to that particular program. And then next is professional experience. So especially for any STEM related programs, things like that, research is really important. A lot of schools want you to have some research experience or internships or things like that before you even apply. And that's becoming more and more common. So I highly encourage, if you're a sophomore or even a junior now, or even a senior, if you're going to be around for a little bit longer, definitely take any opportunity you can to get some real life experience, whether that's a job or an internship or doing on-campus research, because that will go a long way. And then finally, the last quality that a lot of graduate schools say they're looking for are your critical thinking skills. So they want students who can complexly think about problems, be creative, come up with new solutions. So they want to know that you're kind of a well-rounded thinker. And again, that'll definitely come up in probably any essays you're asked to write and in interviews as well. That's something that the people evaluating you are definitely going to be looking for. So this is definitely not a comprehensive set entirely of everything that a graduate school might be looking for when they're considering you for admission, but these are definitely things that you should keep in mind as being important when you're working on filling out that application. So we're now going to talk about what the timeline looks like for this application. And before we get into this, I want to preface with there is no one right timeline. So a lot of students, they might decide I'm going to graduate, after my 4 years at Ohio State in the spring, and I'm going to start a graduate program in the fall. That's totally fine. That happens. There are students who decide to take a gap year in between. That's totally fine too. There are some schools that offer, spring admission, summer admission. So the timeline can vary for you and what you're looking for and what the programs of your interest are. So the timeline that I have set up to show you as an example is thinking about it as you're starting to think about graduate school now as a junior or, even earlier than that. And your goal is to start graduate school the fall semester after you graduate from college. But just know that just because this is kind of the template, this does not mean that you're behind the game if you're not going to align with this timeline exactly. So junior year in your spring, that spring semester is about when you're going to want to start thinking about, is grad school something I definitely want to do? So start to really seriously consider if it's an investment you want to make, and if it's a process you want to go through. And that's the time you're going to want to start researching programs. So start talking to professors and other mentors and people in your life to figure out what programs you might be interested in applying to and begin looking into their application requirements. The summer before your senior year is when you want to start to narrow down that list, because applications are going to be due that following semester. So you want to make sure you have your list, you're clear on what application materials are required for each school, so that you'll be ready to go once the applications actually need to be submitted. At this point, you'll want to register for the GRE or any other standardized tests you may have to take. Again, a lot of schools are test optional now, meaning they don't require a GRE score, but some schools may. So you definitely want to check those requirements and make sure that you're registering for any exams well in advance. I think for me, I believe I took my GRE in October and my program application deadline was December. So just to give you a rough idea, you'll want to register in the summer, give yourself a couple of months to study, and then take the exam. Also in the summer, you're going to want to identify who you can reach out to for letters of recommendation. So start thinking about faculty members that you can get in touch with, or any other, job supervisors or people who are going to be able to speak well to your character and your academic abilities. You're going to want to start to identify who those people might be, as well as begin working on your essays. Something important to keep in mind that definitely surprised me about the application process was that a lot of schools require your personal statement that you can submit to all schools, but also supplemental essays that take a good bit of time to work on and make sure they're done well. So you want to start kind of looking at those essays and start drafting those. Then once senior year starts, that's when you want to get in contact with who you want to ask for letters of recommendation for, and work on those essays and complete those applications. The typical window for when applications are due for most, not all, most programs will be somewhere in that October to December range of your senior year for admission beginning the following year. A lot of schools do applications on a rolling basis. They might have priority deadlines, things like that, but that's a good window you can usually bet that your applications will be due in. It's at this point you also want to start looking into financial aid and scholarship applications and make sure you're completing those as well. And then finally, we get to your senior year spring. Your applications are all submitted. The hard part is done. Now is when the ball kind of comes into your court. And it's going to be your time to start making some decisions between the schools that offer you admission. It's at this point you might be invited for interviews. Some campuses will bring candidates to campus, do Zoom interviews, things like that, to determine that you're a good fit for their program. So that'll be happening in the spring most likely. And then April 1st is the national decision deadline. So what that means is all graduate schools have to give you, by this national rule, until April 1st to make your decision. And you have to submit your decision and pay your deposit to your chosen school by that date. So that's important to keep in mind. But then after that, your decision will be made and you are well on your way. So that's kind of the overview of the timeline for how you should plan on applying to grad school. Are there any questions right now before I hand it off to Kira to move into our next section?
Yeah, I've been playing the role of keyboard warrior over here, trying my best to answer stuff in the chat. So yeah, I think we should be good.
All right, well, thank you very much, Zaid. And again, we'll catch any other questions that might come in at the end during our Q&A. So now I will hand it off to Kira to talk about some GRE and some other exciting topics.
Sure. So we're going to talk about standardized tests. As Caitlin's mentioned a couple of times, a lot of programs, a lot of colleges are going testing optional. Two things to note about that. First of all, a college, which is a unit within a university, and a university often have two separate admissions and application processes. So a university can be test optional, but the college or department may require it, right? So make sure that when we say research, Make sure you're researching both, right? The other thing to consider about standardized tests is while they may be test optional for admission, they may not, in the case of OSU, be test optional for fellowship consideration. Fellowship is when basically it's much like a GA or a TA or an RA, but instead of having to work those 20 hours a week and earn that small stipend, you are a full-time student and you still earn the stipend. It's the holy grail of graduate funding, right? But most schools, especially ones that are considered research intensive like OSU, still require them for fellowship consideration. So keep that in mind. I've also assisted scholars in finding programs that are all test optional, right? They were like, I don't even want to have to worry about it. That's very much an option as well. So, but you need to know what exams you need, and you need to know what they cost, right? Currently, right now, the GRE is $205. That has to be paid all at one time. What you can do though, and this is available for all of the tests, so that means GRE, GMAT, LSAT, MCAT, PCAT, all of them, right? They all also have voucher systems. And so depending on your income level, you can apply for a fee waiver for this test of your choice. Every organization does their fee waiver a little differently, but the GRE, what they do is in their waiver, they pay for half of it. So your cost now is reduced to $102.50. That's what you would be responsible for, and then GRE would waive the other half. So it just really depends on what exam you're going to do, but please know that at the time of registration, you also have to pay in full or have your waiver already issued. I mentioned, verifying with the graduate school and the academic department, because those are two different things often, and sometimes they have various requirements. I cannot stress enough how important it is to take a free test online. They are everywhere, you guys. Google them, they are there. There are some really, really good ones too, that mimic the actual exam. You can take one. I always tell people to take it before you do any studying, because you establish a baseline, right? And you know what you're working with and what you're working toward. Invest in and complete assignments and preparation materials. There are online courses. There are YouTube channels. There are actual physical books. There are ebooks. There are all kinds of preparation materials. Make sure that you are utilizing them for what we would consider credible sources, right? Like Princeton Review, and not, GRE.com. Well, who is that? Because that's not the official GRE manufacturer, right? We want to make sure that you're getting it from, but invest in that. That may cost you anywhere from $50 to actually some of the MCAT preps go up to $10,000, right? But there's also a lot that can be done for free or for a very minor cost. If possible, if you have no other people who are also looking to take that exam, form a study group. It helps ensure accountability and it keeps you guys sharp. Find out what the last class's average score is. So if it is a program or a college that does require it, they often can tell you, our last class required in our LSAT a 198. I'm making these up. I don't know, but just as an example. So if you took that first practice exam and you're at a 188, you're trying to get closer to that 198 the next time you take it. Take a second practice test. So after you've done your studying, after you've done your group work, take a second one to see how close you are. I am of the belief that you do not take these exams more than once. They are expensive and they are time consuming. I would much rather prepare on the front end and then go than have to take it over and over again, right? It's a lot of money and it's a lot of time. I would rather have scholars sit out a semester or a year, fully prepare themselves for the exam, and then take it and only have to take it once, get the score they want, and then move on with their life, right? And if you don't do well, it's not the end of your grad school journey, right? I was a person who did not do well. I knew I wasn't going to do well, to the point that I make sure to address it in my personal statement, right? But that didn't mean, obviously I got into graduate school. So next, letters of recommendation. So I saw Reset had put a great question in there that Zaid answered already. But you want to be strategic about this. Oftentimes people will say, oh, I need to get, 3 letters of recommendation. I'm going to ask my advisor for this organization I'm in. I'm going to ask my supervisor, and then I'm going to ask my professor in an art class that I took, 2 years ago, even though I'm an engineering major now. No. You always want to make sure that you are prioritizing academic references, right? As Zaid said, for one, it shows the school that you have made connections within the field, but you also have some mastery of the material in the field. You will also not ask for a letter of recommendation from an instructor that you did not do well in the class, right? So if you got a D, don't ask just because they're in that area, right? Because you want somebody who can speak to your academic prowess, right? They're going to be talking about how you engaged in class. They're going to be talking about how often you volunteered information. They're going to talk about your leadership and how you got along with your peers. Those are the things. So obviously, if that reflects a good grade, that makes your application all the stronger. Though most will ask for 3, I always tell people find 5 to 6 potential recommenders, because everybody isn't going to be available to write you every letter for every program that you're applying to. So I always ask them to find 5 or 6. The bulk of them, again, academic references. I do think that it's okay to have, say, especially if you're going into a program that makes sense. You're doing something in management or something like that. It makes perfect sense for you to have a supervisor write you a letter, right? Makes a little less sense if you're looking to go into social work and your part-time job is at Marshall's. That might make a little less sense, right? So think about who those 5 to 6 recommenders are, because not everybody's going to be available. Timeline. Always tell people, do not ever ask for a letter of recommendation less than 4 weeks out. In the year of our Lord 2022, with the panini upon us, nobody has time, y'all, okay? I have seen some really great students not be able to apply to programs because they waited 2 weeks. That's still not enough time. They waited 3 weeks. That's still not enough time. Everybody is super busy. Everybody's stressed out. Everybody is getting COVID and having to go down, for a week or two. You want to build in 4 to 5 weeks before you ever need it, right? What I also tell people is ask. When you ask face to face. It definitely, you can do it via email. For me, it's just so much more personable, and you're more likely to get a yes, right? People have a hard time saying no face to face, even if it's via Zoom, not necessarily in person, but even if it's via Zoom, they're more likely to say yes. One of the things that I say is that I always tell them, no, don't just ask, can you write a letter for me? Ask them if they can write a stellar letter, right? And that's something that I did. I said, I actually used the word stellar. And then they would chuckle. And I said, no, I'm serious. I need you to write me a letter like I am in the top 1% of students you have ever taught in your life. And if you cannot do that, no hard feelings, but let me know now. Right? And luckily they all agreed and we went. But what I knew was, remember I told you, I knew I wasn't going to do well on the GRE. I was being strategic. So I knew the rest of my package had to be stellar because my GRE score was not going to be great, right? What you also want to do is give some background information. So what I did is I created a portfolio. And in that portfolio, I had my CV, right, which is a converted resume to a curriculum vitae, which really means the life of your education. So you list everything you've done. My statement of purpose was in there. At my undergrad, they call them unofficial transcripts. At OSU, they're called advising reports. It had my writing sample. It had any instructions for them. I was very detailed I told them exactly what I wanted them to put in the letter, right? I told them, can you please mention that she needs to be funded? Can you please mention that I got this grant money, with you working on this project? Can you please mention that I was selected to represent the university and DC? I had them each touch on different things that I knew I wouldn't have space for in my statement of purpose, but that I needed the committee to know about, right? And then you can always ask to see it before it's submitted. Now, technically, because a lot of places do like forms now that are actually dropped in as opposed to uploads, that may not be, you may not be able to do that, right? But if they do uploads, I asked a couple of people, I'll ask all 3 people that wrote my master's, and they all said yes. When I did my doctorate, I asked 3 of them, and 2 of them said yes. One of them said no. I was like, okay. But all all you get is a no. I took the shot, right? Like, and the good thing is with the 2 who said yes, I was actually able to correct something that they had wrong, right? One of them had a wrong date, and one of them had me in a different class, sets of classes. So just little things like that, right? Next. So your statement of purpose. This is actually comes from a handout that Dr. Rebecca Wanzo, who used to be a professor here, who is now at Washington University in St. Louis, created. And she did a workshop for us as master students preparing to apply to doctoral students years ago. And I love it. It's a whole form to front and back, but these are some of the highlights. Treat your statement of purpose like it's the most important paper you're ever going to write, because it is, right? For a lot of schools, this is the only way that they're going to get a feel of who you are. And you have to do it on paper. So make sure that you have taken the time and the energy. Never do you want to submit your first, second, third, fourth, or fifth draft of your statement of purpose. That's how important this is, right? You want to make sure that you address the questions asked. One of the things that I was fortunate to do twice is to serve on graduate school admission committees at OSU. One for my department and one at the graduate school level. It was remarkable to me how many students talked about everything else but the actual instructions on the form, right? And what the committee now knows is not only did you not read, but all you did was copy and paste the letter you wrote for that other school, right? And now, are you considered now? Not likely. Avoid being poetic and making these grandiose statements you cannot support. Like, with this degree, I plan to change the world single-handedly by eliminating poverty. But come now, right? Let's be a little more realistic. Now, that still may be your goal, but let's talk about how incrementally and realistically what that looks like, right? I like to add to the structures that eliminate worldwide poverty by doing ABC. See? Ask a trusted professor for feedback always. I actually tell people to ask for 2 different sources, right? If you have some other kind of mentor in the field or academic advisor or success coach, ask them, but then also ask for that mentor, because the mentor is going to be looking around content and the rest of us are going to be looking around grammar and formatting. Proofread it at least twice. I hate reading aloud, but it does something to catch your mistakes, right? Do it at least twice and take some time between it. Write it, set it aside, take a day or 2, and then come back to it. Your brain needs to kind of forget what you wrote so it can catch the mistakes. So this is the outline that I mentioned to you earlier. We're also going to share, y'all can screenshot this if you want, but we're also going to share this, this information with you guys as well. And so basically what Dr. Wanzo did was kind of give you some background on what the introduction should look like. Make sure you're talking about your intellectual interest. I know some places call it a personal statement, right? Some places call it a statement of application. Like, it's a little bit different everywhere, but typically they'll tell you what they want in it. And if they don't, this is a fairly generic outline that I think would pass the muster at almost any school. So you can look at the different sections and talk about those things. One of the things that people often sometimes mistake is when they hear personal statement, they think, oh, I'm supposed to tell you about my life. No, you're supposed to tell about your intellectual life, about your scholarship life, right? About your academic life. That's what graduate school is about. And so that's what you should be writing the statement of purpose in. Caitlin, I see I have a question. Do I go ahead and answer it now? Or do we want to wait until we get to the Q&A?
Yeah, I saw a raised hand. If whoever that was wants to ask their question real quick, you can go.
It looks like it's Devin Fate. Devin, are you there?
I am so sorry. I did not know that my hand was raised.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, no problem. Go. So I won't read this all to you, but basically your introduction is about your intellectual interest. You want to support it with your scholarship. So you want to go back and do some reading. Yes, that means that you're going to have to read some articles or some books and talk about it. You want to tie that into your personal experience. So that's where you want. So in my case, my introduction talked about how I was always, for my master's program, I was always interested in African and African American studies, because those were the programs that I was interested in, and then what I wanted to study while I was there. Then I tied in some articles that dealt with that topic that I wanted to study. And then I talked about how that love of African and African studies grew for me as a small child, loving my local library, in which my librarian, Mrs. King, I still remember her name to this day, would give me all of these books on different aspects of Black history and philosophy and psychology, etc. Right? So that's when you can get personal. Your intellectual history just talks about whatever work you've done, right? This is where you would talk about research, publications, conferences, anything like that. If you have relevant work or volunteer experience and how it fits in with your intellectual history, remember, has to be related. So no, you're not going to put that, my part-time job is Donato's in there. That doesn't have anything to do unless you're getting a hospitality management degree, right? You're looking for that. Any post-degree plans? What do you want to do with this degree? What's the next step? Mine simply said, I plan to pursue a PhD, which is what I did, right? And then attraction. So what are you interested in at that school? Why that institution? Why that program? And who in the faculty, as Omar mentioned earlier, who in the faculty are you interested in working with, right? And why? Then we go to the next one. Okay. So interviews. A lot of schools now have moved to interviews, especially now Zoom, which is great because they used to be in person, which often were at the expense of the student who had to travel to the school in order. And if you were, obviously applying to schools across the country, that could be very expensive. And what really is cost prohibitive. But now they're doing lots and lots via Zoom. So make sure you treat it like any other interview, right? Job interview you would do. Research your institution in your program. Review potential questions, right? You can Google potential graduate school interview questions. Hundreds come up. Use those to kind of help you think about what are some of the questions you ask. One of the things you don't want to do, you can't anticipate every question, but you don't want someone to ask you something fairly simple and easy, like, so tell me, you mentioned in your personal statement that, this program really resonates with you because we have a heavy focus on anthropology, right? Tell me a little bit more about that. And you're like, I just like anthropology, right? So think about what you would do. Use your resources. At OSU, we have Buckeye Careers. One of the things they do is mock interviewing. And that's not just for jobs. They do mock graduate school interviews as well. So they will actually set up a panel and sit down with you and act like a graduate committee and ask you these questions. And you can get real live practice. They can record it and then they can give it to you so you can see where you need to work and get feedback. Amazing resource, completely free. Absolutely use. Practice, practice, practice with your friends, with your partner, with your parents, like with your dog. Practice. You want to be comfortable. You want your personality to shine through, but you also want to be prepared and make sure that you say the things that you need to say. And above all, make sure that you send a thank you email. I'm still old school. I actually do send thank you mails in the card in the mail, but a thank you email is absolutely sufficient. So next steps in some OSU resources, please make sure to use your time wisely, right? So one of the things that Caitlin said earlier, which I cannot underscore enough, is that, there is no ideal timeline for everybody. I was a person who thought I was going to take a gap year, and I took 7 gap years before I came back for my master's, right? And people kept saying, oh, you're never going to go back. You're used to earning real money now because I had a full-time job. And they were like, there's no way you're going to go back to being a broke student, blah, blah, blah. No, I said what I said, right? And so I wound up going back, getting a master's, filling through to a PhD, and God said the same, and the creek don't rise. April 15th, it's over. Like I'm finally done. But use your time wisely, right? Be consistent and make sure to ask for help. None of us know everything, but between us, we can probably figure out most things, right? And if we don't know it, we have contacts who do. So other places that you can get information and help from, of course, the graduate school here at OSU, the graduate programs of interest. Like I reached out to people directly when I had questions or things weren't clear on websites. I emailed directly the graduate studies coordinator. And they're usually listed on the website and just said, hey, I'm not really sure about this. Can you tell me a little bit more? Or this said, the page here says this and page this says that. Can you, and sometimes it was just a mistake. Sometimes an oversight. Sometimes they were like, oh, we thought that had been updated, right? Your academic advisors, ODI success coaches, and your mentors and professors. Ask. People always want to see you win. They always want to help and offer whatever they can to make sure that you get to your goal.
All right, thank you so much, Kira. That was great. At this point, we are ready to take any other lingering questions you may have. So if there's anything that comes up that you still are curious about, we would be happy to elaborate on anything. So Zaid, are there any questions that are at this point unanswered still that we can help with?
No, as it is right now, we do not have any questions, but audience members, definitely feel free to drop your questions in the chat. You can also turn on your mic and just ask your questions verbally at this point.
And as if people are thinking about if they have any questions, just to let you all know, this session is being recorded and I'll be sending this out to you with the link to our survey later this week. So if there's anything that you want to go back and reference, you will have that for you. And speaking of which, I'm going to put up the link to our survey right now. If you want to go ahead and scan this and fill this out right now, you are welcome to. We will be randomly selecting a few students who fill this survey out within the next week to receive a Target gift card. So we would very much appreciate any of your feedback.
And actually, real quick, just want to emphasize Katie's point about filling out the evaluation. It's really important. It helps us understand what kinds of programming is helpful for our students. And then while I have the mic, I do want to put in a plug for being an ODI tutor. Next autumn semester, we're currently hiring for tutors and SI leaders. I'm going to drop a file in the chat that basically is the hiring flyer. So all the information is going to be on that flyer. I'll put it in the chat. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. And while that's happening, we do have some questions in the chat. So I'm going to start with Aaron's question, and I'm going to ask that my panelists, Omar, Kira, or Katie, feel free to chime in. Aaron's question is, could you please touch again on how many how many recommendations schools usually ask for, and from whom you recommend those reps to come? I'm sorry, I'm reading it exactly as it's written, and maybe I need to read it a little slower.
They
but Aaron,
read tonight. It's been a long day. We know.
Okay, yeah.
So what I mentioned was every school is different, right? I've seen as little as 2, but I've also seen as many as 5. Typically, it's 3. Right? That has been my experience. It's been 3, but it can be very different. One of the reasons why I recommend 5 to 6 people is because, like I said, everybody won't be available necessarily at all times. So like say one deadline is October 15th for early decision, another one is November 15th, another one is January 15th. Perhaps the person that's December 15th is like, I'm not doing anything before finals. So no, I can't write you a letter for that school. Well, then you already have a backup. Right? And you don't have to scramble and be like, oh my God, who can I get? And then now it's the last minute and you're trying to find someone and you're trying to find somebody and not give them at least a month's notice. No good, right? One of the things I did mention before, not to scare y'all, but sometimes people will one of the reasons why I tell people about the stellar thing is because people will agree to write you a letter and it not be a great letter. Unfortunately, you guys, I've sat on 2 committees that I've mentioned to y'all, one department and one university-wise. And there were letters, and I'm like, there's no way this person saw this letter before it went out. Because not only was it like the most lukewarm, mediocre letter, it was really like, Caitlin would do all right in your program. She is an average student with an average intellect. Like, what? Like, oh my goodness. So that's one of the reasons why I say, ask them if they can write you a stellar and excellent and amazing letter. because otherwise people will write them and they won't be any of that. When you say from whom those should be, I say they should absolutely be primarily academic references, which would be professors that you have taken classes with. In some cases, I know students have done really well in coursework that was taught, that's relevant to the major, that was taught by TAs. In that case, I do tell students that that would be acceptable, just to make sure that that is communicated, right? Because sometimes the TA is teaching a couple of really great classes that you did well in that have something to do with the area that you're interested in for grad school. You don't want to miss that opportunity just because they're not a professor, but it's still an academic reference, right? And yes, you can also use ODI, people, that kind of thing, manage that work. If you have fulfilled, I would say, at least 2/3 of your recommendation minimum with academic references. So if they ask you for 3, 2 of those need to be academic. If they ask you for 5, 3 of them need to be academic. Look at it that way.
Yeah, just to kind of share my experience with the letters of recommendation when it comes to medical schools and law schools. They only allow you 3 or 4, depending on the school. So when you apply to med school, there's AMCAS, which is like the system that you upload everything and then it gets shot out to all of your schools. And so some schools will only allow AMCAS to send 3, others will allow them 4. Keep in mind, to kind of touch base on what Kira was saying, keep in mind that you definitely want to make sure that the letter of recommendation is stellar or outstanding. They get, med schools get maybe 8,000 or 9,000 applications a year. And they have a whole team of people reading them. It's very, very obvious after a while. I've read MSP scholarships at this point, close to 1,000 myself. And so it's very, very obvious quickly after reading so many, which is a stellar letter of recommendation and which is not. That's why you should be cultivating relationships with people you really connect with, professors you really connect with as deeply as possible, so they can write a strong letter of recommendation that speaks to your character. Letters, sometimes recommenders will give you like a form and they're like, okay, fill this form out and I'll come up with a letter of recommendation for you. That's not necessarily the best maybe person to go to in order for that. You want somebody who is just has so much overflowing with so much to say positively about you. The other thing is programs that are professional, that have careers in the sciences, they definitely need you to have a teacher speak to you. So one of those 3 letters of recommendation will be a teacher. If you're going into a research intensive program, a researcher is also very, very, very much needed. They want people in the science fields, in the STEM fields to speak to your STEM potential, essentially. So those are my thoughts on that. That's all I have to say, I guess.
No, great. So I want to make sure we're getting some of these questions here, and I'm really loving Kira, Omar, and Katie's responses to these here. The next thing here, and maybe Omar can address this question. So Esther asks, are 2 months enough to study for the June LSAT if I plan to study 30 minutes to an hour every day? So again, are 2 months enough if I plan to study 30 minutes to an hour every day?
I would say no, definitely not. And the reason I say that is because usually people at the bare minimum will do a month a day or 3 months with 3-4 hours of studying a day. I like the consistency. I've had students who scored in the top of the MCATs, top of the LSAT, who have literally studied an hour a day every day for a year. To get to the top, right? So that type of slow and smooth consistency can really be helpful, but you need to expand the time frame. That being said, the vast majority of really high scorers take the test multiple times. They don't just take it once. I think there's an assumption coming from your guys' end when you don't know much about this test, is that like it's a one shot and done kind of thing. No, schools look at your highest score up to 3 or 4 takes of the MCAT or the LSAT, even sometimes the GRE, depending on the school. But speaking towards medicine or law, you definitely want to recognize that you're giving yourself some time to be able to do the studying and to be able to retake the exam. As far as retakes goes, historically, studies have shown that the first take that you take of any test, whether it's the MCAT or GRE or the LSAT, you underperform what you're typically capable of. Nerves, you're not used to the test taking environment, you're not used to the settings. So that first test, you likely underperform, and therefore it's not the best reflection of your grade. So keep that in mind, expand your horizons, broaden out your ability. You may need to take a lighter workload in the next semester, in addition to studying for the summer, so that way you can give yourself enough time to really succeed. Another thing you should think about is tutors for the LSAT, tutors for the MCAT. Find yourself somebody who has gotten the results that you have, not somebody who can speak about the test, but someone who objectively got the results, and work with them. It may be an investment, tutoring. They are expensive, but think about the return on your investment when it comes to scholarship. It's very worth it. Let's say you spend $1,000 in scholarships or in tutoring to get $10,000 in scholarship. I mean, the ROI on that is tenfold. So think about those types of things when you consider studying for the test.
Awesome. Great points, Omar. And so there's one more question that I want to direct towards Katie, because I know Katie actually ran a program that discussed this very subject just last semester. So let's see, where are we? I just lost it. There we go. I think it's Taya, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but Taya wants to know, how would you recommend getting involved in relevant research as someone who is at the end of their third year? Where would I start to look for opportunities to do research?
Yeah, great question. So I think the important thing to remember when we're thinking about doing any undergrad research, I know contacting professors can be really intimidating, but professors genuinely want you to be interested and they want to work with you. So that's the first thing to think about, is that the professors want you to reach out. In terms of the best way to go about getting involved, first of all, it's never too late to be involved in research. So I know you said you're at the end of your third year, definitely not too late for that. So don't let that be a deterrent. The best thing to do is figure out what area you're interested in. So let's say it's biology. You got to be more specific than that to have the best chance of finding a research partner that's going to benefit you. So go on to OSU's biology, website, and you can look at their faculty and look at what research projects every faculty member is working on. So if you see one that really seems interesting to you, I would email that faculty member directly and say, hey, I'm really interested in getting involved with this research project you're working on. Do you have any room in your lab for me, this summer or next semester, whatever it may be? Faculty members really appreciate it like that when you show a genuine interest in the research they're doing. So that, I think, would be your best strategy, is to go on the website and look at their interests and express interest to the faculty directly that way. Also, if you've taken a class and have a really good relationship with a professor, even if it's not one that you necessarily would want to do research with, ask them if they have any suggestions for people for you to connect with, or they can help make introductions that way as well.
One other thing too that is also a resource is, don't forget the Office of Undergraduate Research and Creative Inquiry, right? They have a section on their website that you can look through different research projects that faculty have put up to say, hey, I'm looking for people. It even goes into whether or not it's paid, whether or not you get it for credit, whether or not it's volunteer, etc., whether or not you can get a publication out of it. Ding, 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 ding. All of that is listed on their website. The other thing that I like about that office is that you can actually set up to do a consultation one-on-one with one of their staff, and they can literally walk you through how this process could work, how you might even decide on your own topic and get funding and do your own research, right? If you wanted to. But they can also walk you through how, and you can get connected with the university faculty member as well.
Awesome. I love it. So yeah, are there any other questions that you all have? I guess we'll hang out here for a few more minutes. You can drop your question in the chat. You can turn on your mic and just ask.
Is like one thing intentional, and I have a question.
Sure.
I was just wondering, is there a difference in the application process when applying to grad school if you're like fresh out of undergrad or if you took like a couple of gap years to apply?
Yeah, I can take that question. That's a good one. So for the most part, no. There might be areas on the application where they might ask if there was any gap in, your undergrad experience between when you're then and when you're applying and what you did with that time. But the application itself will not be any different. You'll still fill out the same personal statement, essays, all of that. The only thing is school to school, they might ask a question about it. But to my knowledge, that would maybe be the only difference.
I want to answer that question from a different angle as well. So, what schools will do, they'll do, what is it called? I'm sorry. The term is regression analysis. So they'll look at the people who graduated from their program, and they'll look at the grades that they got in med school or law school or grad school or whatever. And then they'll go back and try to find common features that these students have that caused them or that led to their success. So, for instance, I think for law school, the University of Colorado published a report that it said if you had work experience anywhere from from 3 to 5 years, it was as if you scored 5 points higher on your LSAT in terms of comparing your LSAT to your grades, right? What I'm trying to get at with this is certain schools are looking specifically for that. Certain schools are looking for work experience after your undergrad. Certain programs are, right. Other people, they might not care. But some places it is a benefit, and other places it doesn't matter. What work experience does show is maturity, ability to work with people, ability to hold a job, so on and so forth. Oh, sorry, my video is off. But yeah, it shows ability to kind of handle those responsibilities and deal with the politics. So it doesn't change in terms of the logistical, how to apply. There's no difference. You obviously have to speak on your resume and parts of your application to that. But some schools that's actually a huge bonus. It would add points to your overall application. So schools have typically schools won't tell you this, but typically schools will have metrics. So they'll have a raw number that they boil your application down into. So let's say for the MCAT, you got a 510, and then your GPA was above the median, for instance. They basically calculate your GPA, they calculate work experience, they calculate your MCAT all into one universal number. So that way they can try to essentially compare students across the board. It doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you get vetoed. Sometimes people are like, I love this applicant so much, even though he doesn't meet that numeric value compared to other people. He's just so cool. We want him. So it's not always the case. But typically the most competitive programs will have some sort of a way to analyze your application and all of the parts, including work experience, and then actually factor that into one metric to be able to compare and standardize applicants across the board. So keep that in mind. That's definitely something you want to look for when you're looking at schools. You want to look at their median GRE, their median GPA, and most students who are above those, both of those metrics are called presumptive admits. So the school's like, yeah, this person pulls up our average, therefore we want to take that person into our program. So look for those types of things when you're applying as well. I should have mentioned that in my presentation, so I thought I'd tack it on here. Thank you.
One of the things that's really important, I want to make sure to say before we run out of time, that Omar mentioned, is how important that social capital building is, right? He talked about if somebody really loves your application. So remember, I told you guys, I knew I wasn't going to do well on the GRE. I'm a planner. I'm strategic as all get out. So now on top of making sure the rest of my package was really, really strong, who contacted every single faculty in each department at each university that she wanted to go to. cheated? Who read articles and books by those people and sent them emails and questions about that work before she applied? Me. Who then developed a relationship a year and a half before they ever saw my name on paper to consider me as a candidate for their program? When I tell you that I was going to get into the program I wanted to, that I was going to get funded, and that I was not going to let a poor GRE score keep me from doing what I wanted to do, I am not joking. Now, the flip side is that was a whole part-time job, y'all. I spent easily 20 hours a week for over a year working on grad school stuff, period. Because I was applying to 3 programs. So but it's so important, because what I was told once I got into the program and got there was like, oh, your name came up and everybody had your file. They actually had physical files back then. And people had your file and they were like, oh yeah, Kira, oh yeah, we talked to her, she's good. Oh, you talked to her too? Oh, you're for real? Yeah, I talked to her. Oh yeah, okay, cool. Put me to the side. That was it. They didn't even discuss me, y'all. They didn't even have a conversation. But because I had reached out to all of them and had really good conversations and built relationships with all of this virtually, mind you, they automatically put me in the admin pile.
No, I love it. I love it. And I think really what Kira is trying to show you all here is just, you got to be persistent. You got to this is work, right? Applying to graduate school is work. And in a way, that's a good thing, because this is a major life commitment, a lot of time, a lot of money. You're committing to a field, a career. And so you want to make sure that you're taking the step that aligns with what you actually want to do. So no, this is amazing, but we are kind of running short on time. Devin, I do see that you have your hand raised, so perhaps I can try to attempt to answer the question that you have.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to know, like, in light of that question that I asked about feeling like I was in an unrelated field as it pertains to what I wanted to go,
Right.
For grad school, what, and you mentioned working in a public health field, like, how would is there any way that you guys would recommend that I could find those opportunities?
So and just to give everyone context here, Devin is attempting to transition into a graduate program field that is different than his current field. And he wants to know, what can he do to kind of bridge the gap? And what I recommended in the chat was for Devin to try to see if he can find any public health related or public health adjacent professional opportunities, be it a job or something along those lines. Maybe he can volunteer. Maybe he can shadow someone who works in public health. But the idea here is you want to help the admissions committee see the connection between how you went from, a psychology undergraduate, for example, to now wanting to be in public health. You'll address that in your personal statement, but I think it helps when you have something on your resume to show that you really kind of understand this field and you care about it. So to now answer your question directly, Devin, which is how do you find those kinds of opportunities? There are a number of things that you can do, right? So you can Google, you can go to Indeed.com, you can look at the Columbus Department of Public Health, right? That's just a natural one that comes to mind. You can look at and research jobs that are currently open that are entry level that have to do with public health. So that's one thing you can do. I also actually recommend, and this is funny, a lot of people overlook this, but if you're trying to get into a specific program, there's no better way to know what you need to do to get into that program than to talk to a representative from that program. And so outside of trying to find those professional opportunities, I recommend connecting with an admissions counselor in a public health master's program that can tell you what are the things that you can do to bridge that gap? What are the things that we are looking for? How you can make a strong application. Yeah, so hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of insight. I think, and Devin, you and I know each other. We've known each other for years, and maybe we can have more of a conversation about this. But long story short, you all, the idea is you want to make it apparent to the admissions committee, because they don't know any better. You want to make it apparent to them why it is and how it is that you're making the jump from one field to a completely different one. And there's no right or wrong answer. As long as you make it make sense, and as long as it makes sense to you, then you should be fine. So with that, I am going to conclude our Grad School 101 program. I can't say enough just how thankful I am for everyone being here. I want to give a major shout out to our esteemed presenters and panelists, Katie Morton, Kara Carson, Omar Soccer. You all are great, and there's no question our students got a lot of information out of this. Just so you all know, as attendees, we are currently recording this presentation, and our goal is to have it added to the ODI YouTube page sometime within the next few weeks. We have to go through captions and, accessibility requirements, things like that. So it could take a little bit of time. But once we have that up, we'll send an email out so that you all can have access to this. So that's all on my end. I want y'all to have a great night. And what is it that they say? Go Bucks? Is that the saying around here? Is that what they say? Go Bucks.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Everybody.